All right. Hello, everyone. Um, I hope you can hear me, you can see me. So, welcome and thank you for joining us. We're thrilled to have you here with us today for a live webinar, this time about Ontime's journey with Automat-it to build a secure and scalable landing zone solution on AWS. So, if you can see here on my name tag, my name is Yoav Marcus, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. So, whether you are here with us from the UK, Europe, or elsewhere, we just wanted to thank you for taking the time to be with us. As you can see, also the experts driving today's session with me are Simon Cockle, co-founder and CTO of Ontime, Mario Manca, early stage startups account manager on AWS. And last but not least, our own Quex principal solution architect, obviously from Automat-it. Um, so just before a few notes before we'll kick off and start with the professional part of this webinar, I want to remind you that the session is recorded for the sake of sharing it with you and other registrants who could not join us today. Also, it's important to let you know that we'll leave time for a live Q&A session. So please, once you type your questions, make sure you do it within the Q&A field and not in the chat. Again, not in the chat, please, because it will be super hard for us to follow through. And after the Q&A session, we'll have a short live raffle that one of you here could win $100 an Amazon gift card. Again, one of you here is just for the attendees, not for us, the speakers. So now, with your permission, sit back, stay curious, and I think I'm gonna head it to you, Simon.
Thank you very much, Jav. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. I'm Simon Cockle. I'm the CTO and a co-founder of Ontime Payments Limited. I'm not going to talk too much about Ontime. It's not really germane to Landing Zone, but I will provide a little context to help position why we wanted to implement it, how we implemented it, and some of the things that came up. Um, so we built on-time payments to allow people to pay their bills directly from their salary. It really is that simple. It turns out it's quite complicated to build, but the reason why we built it is that there are millions of people in the UK who, if they do pay their bills using on-time, will pay less. And there are millions of people for whom those savings will make a huge difference. And paying bills using on-time doesn't cost the consumer anything. Next slide, please, Joab. So And one more slide. Sorry, I forgot to tell you to change slides. Could you go to the next slide, please? So our journey began last year. We were founded in 2024. And like a lot of early stage startups, we first focused on building out a proof of concept. And a POC is quite good because it's not BAU, and you can be quite flexible with what you aim to achieve and what you use to achieve it. POCs don't tend to be particularly cost sensitive. A little bit, but we don't need to scale a POC to support millions of consumers. We don't need to um, scale our management, monitoring, our support. It's a time box project. Our risk is relatively constrained. And once we've built it and we're running it, we can then start taking our focus into moving into more of an operational model. In an operational model where we are planning for BAU, we are planning for scale. Cost does matter. Marginal cost as we increase the number of consumers on the platform makes a huge difference. Being able to manage our compliance, manage our cloud estate makes a huge difference. And we want to build scalable foundations so that as we scale over the next few years, we're not struggling to change some of the foundational decisions we made early on. So to do that, we made a few decisions. We moved away from ECS and RDS to using Lambdas and DynamoDB. Our model is inherently spiky, and we get a huge number of benefits from using serverless capabilities, including reduced consumption costs, security, scalability, performance. A lot of things come out of the box. We also moved to an event architecture. We built some platforms to enhance observability, increase automation. We evolved our Terraform from being a single monolithic component to being multi-state. But we also needed to scale the way we treated our infrastructure. As a business, we're going to be growing in the next few years. We're going to be hiring more people, we'll be running more projects, we'll have more teams. And as we bring those people and those teams and products and projects in, we will be extending our cloud estate. And as that grows, our risk surface area grows. So we started looking at a landing zone as being a governance platform that we could bring in whilst we're a very early stage business in our second year, before we start to have some of the growing pains that come with scaling, and that doesn't introduce a great deal of friction in the short term whilst we are small, but does allow us to grow with confidence, knowing that we're managing our cloud estate as we add things to it. And next slide, please. So we've known AWS and Automate for about a year. We've worked with them on a number of different projects, and we see them as very much long-term partners. There's a lot of value that an early stage can get from partners like Automate and AWS, and it's not just about getting credits. Credits are great for offsetting some of the early costs, but we've seen tremendous value in augmenting our team with the execution and the experience and knowledge that both AWS and Automate bring to us. And we've run a range of different projects. We've talked about a few more projects. We're planning some more projects, and we've got more things that are a bit further out. As a few examples, um, automation POC using Lambda and Bedrock to build a very, very fast means of entity resolution, taking some components, packaging them up into AWS Marketplace. We migrated from RDS to DynamoDB last year, but we weren't really experts at it. So we lent a lot on the solution architects within AWS to help us understand some of the challenges we might face as we scale, to make sure that we weren't missing things that we should be thinking about now. Specifically at the moment, we're also engaged with their FIS architectural review team. This is a team that I've always assumed had been targeted mostly at larger financial organizations, not startups, but we're working with them to allow them to challenge some of the architectural decisions we've made, to help us gain confidence that we've made the right decisions and to fill gaps where there are improvements. Again, at an early stage before we start to scale next year. The last thing I've mentioned is that we've moved all of our FinOps tooling, um, our cloud FinOps under Automate. This gives access to their FinOps tooling. It gives us access to some discounted rates, and it gives us access to their team. And we can challenge their team to solve particular problems that are interesting to us when we start forecasting serverless and consumption pricing, which is incredibly hard to do when you're basing it on figures that you're making up because your platform isn't yet live. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So the fundamental problem we're trying to solve is that of managing accounts um, at scale. We need to have a lot of accounts, not hundreds. We're not a SaaS business, but using multiple AWS accounts is an incredibly important thing to do because it provides very hard isolation boundaries between teams and workloads. It separates duties, and it allows us to manage our security posture, and manage our teams internal and externally with much more confidence. We've adopted an assume breach mindset. That basically says that infrastructure is incredibly complicated. Attacks are going to happen. They can be hard to detect. They can be hard to understand the breadth after they've been attacked. And it can be hard to understand how attacks move through a system. So to mitigate against that, we have a zero trust policy, which means that every component we release has got the minimal permissions it needs to operate. And we very jealously protect all of the logging and audit heuristics that created throughout normal operation of the platform, so that if there is an attack, if we get breached in any way, that data is protected and can't be deleted in a way that might be to cover up a breach. For that, you need multiple accounts. You need to be able to separate workloads into different accounts. On top of that, you've got a number of other reasons. That quotas, for example, are managed against the account level within AWS. If you want to have very strong control over what services are allowed to consume what quotas, then breaking them into separate accounts makes a lot of sense. You can only really get a confident view of your total cost by looking at the account level. There are lots of, well, there are some meters that can't be tagged, so you can't use tagging in the cost management console to start tracking those. If you're separating different workloads into different accounts or different projects into different accounts, then you can get comprehensive and highly accurate cost matrix. Now you can control a lot of this using mechanisms that AWS provides out of the box, but there are hundreds of controls. There are a lot of different ways you can restrict access and different ways you can get preventative and reactionary response to things that breach your policies. But if you're implementing your policies manually, you can't have a guarantee that your policies are correct unless you verify them. And as your estate grows, the number of accounts grow, the number of teams grow, you will have more than one policy. And if you can't have confidence that your infrastructure meets your policies, then you're not able to measure risk. And if you can't measure risk, then you're running with an unrun risk, and that's a very bad thing to do because of obvious reasons. Um, the last thing I mentioned is that we want our developers to focus on delivering features. We're an early stage company. We have very few developers, and we don't want them to spend additional time working with infrastructure. We want to minimize the friction of setting up new accounts. Every time we take somebody off to start looking at infrastructure, we're losing cycles that could be used to help evolve the platform. We're going to hire new teams next year, and we want them to be self-service as much as they can. Where they can't be self-serve, they're then going to be dedicating their time to creating environments that work for them. And moving on. So the goals of a landing zone for us, initially, first off, we don't want to experience a lot of friction whilst the team is small. We don't want to do something that will be valuable in the future, only to find out that it's hampering us in the short term. So our initial goal is that we don't want to suffer from implementing it now. We want to gain benefit through automating the process of creating accounts and creating profiles. We want to be able to iterate through projects and experiments more quickly. And that's really critical. If you think of an experiment as being anything from a strategic thesis that's important for the future of your business to a great idea you had on Sunday morning, you want to go from that conception to execution very quickly. If you can't do that, if it takes longer to spin up projects, if it takes longer to be able to dedicate development resource, then you can run fewer projects. And as I mentioned, we want to be able to isolate the costs and get assurance that as we're deploying new accounts, as we're moving into production footing, we are able to track our compliance. We're able to track how consistent um, our infrastructure posture is with our risk management profile. And that's important not just internally. We want to be able to use metrics that we get from within AWS to feed into our risk management process, but we also want to be able to use it to demonstrate to our customers, to auditors, to regulators that we've got a comprehensive and mature approach to managing our cloud estate. And next slide, please. So the design goals that we set out to achieve with Landing Zone were that we can spin up projects, POCs, we can spin up accounts very quickly that are tailored to the team using them. So these could be developers working on core elements of our platform. These could be data science teams. These could be external projects that we run with partners such as Automate, where we can very quickly and very easily create an account, guarantee it's completely isolated from other accounts, and also where we can create new production accounts that are consistent with the baselines that we've configured and that are in alignment with our risk policy. Another essential outcome is that all of the controls that we want to bake in are considered as part of the outcome. They're not optional, and they're controlled by blueprints. So this is configuration for CloudTrail, for the AWS config, ensuring we've got a single log archive accounts that guard duty is deployed. We've got separate security tooling accounts. We've configured SCPs to block everything we consider to be risky. Everything that we want to control should be automated. And then to have a single security hub dashboard that gives us a comprehensive view of our entire estate and allows us to track things like foundational best practices, CIS, different conformance against the entire estate if and when we need to, and also allows us to segregate that into production, non-production, or production sandbox workloads. Um, Indeed, what we want is that security score that we can pull out of the security hub to be a key KPI that we track as part of our risk management, so that we can see drift away from the policies that we set and from the compliance goals that we set, and we can fix it. We're not waiting to perform audits. We can have proactive notifications. And then lastly, a single IDP that is used across all of our systems. So across AWS, across internal tooling we build, and across external products. Next slide, please. So, a very brief overview of what Landing Zone is, if you're not familiar with it. It's a control plane. It brings together a number of components that exist within AWS, including organizations for account boundaries, control tower to add opinionated governance, your opinion as to how you want to govern your cloud estate that you can segregate and define based upon different organizational units. And then an account factory to create accounts based on predefined blueprints. Preventative guardrails to enforce rules across the estate, again, that you can customize based on different organizational units. Tag policies, so you can control ownership, cost lineage, etc. It brings consistent identity. The centralized evidence and detection that I mentioned earlier. So separate archives for logs, separate accounts for security tooling. So as you grow your team, you can ensure that different teams only have access to what they need. Now, today we've got a small team and pretty much everybody has access to all of these services, but they're still having to log into the separate accounts where they need them. So you're not overly exposing a lot of information when it doesn't need to be exposed. Secondly, as we grow, we will have dedicated teams that look after networking, that look after security. At the moment, we use an external security company to provide monitoring. Now they can connect through Landing Zone to an account that contains all of the information they need to consume. It makes plugging in third-party tools for monitoring much, much easier. It also provides centralized backup, which is a great feature that I'll come on to in a bit. And on to the next slide, please. The commercial case for deploying Landing Zone is equally important. It reduces your opportunity cost. The time that is taken to manage accounts and manage compliance detracts from some parts of your business. In our case, it's from engineering, from developer time, who can be spending their effort on revenue generating features rather than managing what should be a consistent and non-drifting infrastructure. It de-risks your entire estate. It de-risks your business, reducing the likelihood of an attack and mitigating the potential impact of an attack. That then plays into your cyber insurance. It plays back to the board's risk appetite, and it makes it much easier to make decisions because you know that your core infrastructure is being managed against the baseline that you control. It supports compliance. We got accredited with ISO 27001 at the beginning of the year because it's easier to get that accreditation when you're very small and then manage it as you grow. Once you've got Landing Zone in place, you've got pretty much ready-made evidence to support a lot of those accreditations. It also supports due diligence. That in turn can accelerate how quickly you can sell into large organizations because you're able to demonstrate a mature approach to managing your infrastructure. There's various ways that you can reduce your cost, specifically because you can enforce per account budgets. And you can go into much more granular detail about where money is being spent. You can ensure anomaly detection is configured automatically, and you can expose detailed unit economics on a per product, per team, per account basis if you want. All of this gives you much greater ability to provide accurate forecasting. The ability to add team members, to add new regions, add new products, is greatly simplified because you're using predefined blueprints that you know meet your internal risk policies. So you're spending less time thinking about scaling and more time being able to focus on what matters. Um, and lastly, I'll say it strengthens um, both your position to hire great talent. Great people want to work in companies that are great themselves. And it shows a level of operational maturity that is going to be valuable to VCs, to your partners, and to the people you're selling your product to. Next slide, please. So, um, the process of implementing Landing Zone, and I'm pretty sure Quex will talk a little bit about this as well. Um, Initially, it kicks off with a joint discussion of what the requirements are. So, a review of what we currently have, what we want to keep, and what we're happy to remove and have replaced by new accounts that are being set up. Any prerequisites we have, um, and then we provide information back into the process. So a number of base accounts are going to be created, management, infrastructure, security, sandbox, etc. And there's some basic information that we need to create on our end. We need to provide the appropriate access and configuration to allow a IDP to be adopted. And then the foundational components of Landing Zone can be deployed. So control tower, the organizational structure that we've worked out that we want, and that organizational structure reflects our business domain as well as the core components that fit into the um, management of security and operations. And following that, shared networking. So if you want to have all of your network traffic, all of your ingress, egress routed through a single account, where you can deploy firewalls, where you can deploy standard rules, you can create CIDR rules, um, you can have all accounts automatically configured to route all your traffic through this shared account. Also allows you to configure all of the configuration around Security Hub, Guard Duty, CloudTrail, AWS config. Again, a lot of this is fairly standard, but as part of the onboarding and part of the discovery journey, you might have some specific requirements. We then moved into the infrastructure as code. So previously we were 100% within Terraform, but a lot of the core infrastructure was distributed around different components, different workloads. And after running our POC, we started decomposing this monolithic ISE into individual workloads that can be deployed and destroyed separately. But there are still a number of core capabilities that were deployed as workloads rather than as infrastructure. So this phase allowed Automate in this case to pull out some of this core infrastructure, which were some other gateways, some other API gateways, some ECS services, and bring them into different accounts that were then blueprinted. So if we wanted to duplicate a particular product account, we'd have a clean infrastructure script that only deploys the core infrastructure required for that particular product. That also allowed us to configure DevOps accounts specifically for where we were still using ECR and to provide integration with our code repositories. Following that, we migrated all of the existing workloads. Again, quite easy for us to do that. Surprisingly easy. We were 100% on Terraform, and most of the migration consisted of referencing new values that were ARNs and endpoints that are being created now by a different Terraform script. We use Systems Manager and Parameter Store to manage a lot of these parameters. And so the migration process was really quite straightforward. For each workload, we would go through every time a VPC was mentioned, we'd need to point it at a slightly different variable. And it was much more straightforward than we probably thought it would be in the end. And then following that, testing. Testing knowledge transfer primarily from Automate to us. We were heavily involved in a lot of the migration and we were involved in a lot of the implementation. Throughout the project, we'd have weekly calls to look at progress, but there's still a lot of infrastructure and a lot of knowledge that we want to have in-house because it helps us make better decisions on how we manage this going forward. And then finally, security testing, audits, and performance. Next slide, please. Um, what we got out of it was pretty much that. I'll talk a bit about organizational units on the following slide, along with core accounts. One of the things we took the opportunity to do um, within our POC, apart from having slightly different infrastructure, we had many components, many workloads running within the same account. We took the opportunity at the end of this project to have multiple accounts that work together. So we split a number of our production workloads into different accounts, and the blueprints that were created within Landing Zone created a deployment of a number of accounts that were connected to each other. So we could have services isolated in one account that were able to talk to services isolated in a separate account. That wasn't part of what we were initially planning to do, but because it was so easy, we wanted to do it, and it turned out to be a great time to do it. Um, we also got rid of all of our old accounts, or rather, we migrated everything away from our old accounts. One of the options at the beginning of the project was whether we want to implement Landing Zone on top of our existing accounts or to create new accounts. There are some benefits probably onto using your existing accounts, especially if you don't have everything governed through IAC or if you've got a large existing estate. But we wanted to have all of the accounts created and managed from scratch. So the accounts that we were using, the accounts that had been pen tested, that have gone through various iterations of governance, we were quite happy to stop using and migrate everything out of. And moving on to the next slide, please. Um, so the organization structure is managed from within AWS, and there's two key aspects to it. One is how it maps against our business domain. So if you consider two of these in particular, we've got workloads OU, which contains, in this example, a number of accounts under production and UAT. Anything under workloads is what we consider to be production. And there may be many different components within production. In this case, we've got UAT, but we might also have specific workload accounts. And where you have organizational units, you can customize the security baseline and the guardrail baselines that you apply to each. And another organizational unit we have is Sandbox. This is where all of our development happens. This is where we spin up accounts for projects, for proof of concepts. This is where we could spin up accounts for every engineer who joins. We can give them a dedicated account that, again, abides by a standard baseline. But because it's in a different OU, we can apply different rules to it. If you've got a data science team who needs access to certain services or that run certain capabilities that aren't in use elsewhere, you might want to customize that. Apart from our workloads and the sandbox, the other organizational units are to provide the core accounts that that work across your infrastructure. So a dedicated account for DevOps, where all of your CI/CD services can be centered. Again, once you start scaling, you're going to probably want to have a DevOps team managing those services, or you're at least going to want to have somebody log into a separate account so that you're not exposing access to those services when you don't need to. Likewise with networking, we don't necessarily want developers making their own choices about how they access the internet from within our cloud estate. We want networking to be consistent, and we want to have separate governance that needs to be gone through in order to make changes to our core networking, but we don't want that to slow down teams who want to spin up accounts that work in a standard way. Backups, I'll come on to backups. Backups, you've obviously got AWS backup, which is a great way of managing backups across your estate. You've also got point-in-time backups that work in a slightly different way. What we get with Landing Zone is the ability to configure our data lifecycle rule within our infrastructure code. And if you move on to the next slide, please. This is a fairly crude example. On the right-hand side, if you're familiar with Terraform, this is a resource using Cloud Posse that creates a DynamoDB. And most of the properties have been elided, but you can see we're injecting 4 tags. Those tags relate to variables that can be different per environment. And they're simply Booleans to say, do we want this to be backed up on an hourly daily, weekly, monthly basis. And that's all we need to do. Once that's deployed, we then have a backup schedule that's been defined within a policy definition that dictates how frequently the backups are to happen, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, how frequently those backups are to be tested. So we can have automated restore testing against our point in time or our restore time, restore point objectives, and also determine the retention policy. So we can wrap all of that up into a single tag, define the definition centrally, and then have AWS backup automate the process of executing it, and then providing a compliance report that gets dropped into an S3 bucket. That can then trigger an automation on our side that will review the report, identify any resources that have fallen out of compliance, and allow us to manage backups on an exceptions basis. So we can have the confidence that when something is deployed into a production environment, the governance around our IAC can enforce the inclusion of tags as appropriate, which means we know anything deployed into the production is going to be backed up according to the definitions we've defined, and we know that we'll get notified when we're out of compliance with any of those policy definitions. And the penultimate slide, please. So the results so far, pretty good. We've got greatly simplified IAC, which was a bit of a surprise. We were thinking it would be improved, but I think it's actually significantly improved. We're no longer using any of the old accounts. We've got over 330 controls enabled in different blueprints. We've got greater separation of workload. And we've been running in Landing Zone now for a fairly short period of time, so under 6 months. But we've split out a number of different accounts into dedicated workloads, and we've got the confidence that when we come to implementing new workloads, it's going to be very straightforward to create the appropriate account template and create the appropriate IAC that will run within it. That gives us greater separation and IAC templates that we can reuse. As we bring in data science teams, as we bring in new developers, we know that we've got a baseline set of blueprints that are going to evolve over time. But we know that as at a point in time, they are compliant with our risk policy, and it gives us a great way to evolve as we start to grow. The data management policies and the life cycles defined within the infrastructure is a huge step forward over having to manually specify what you want to be backed up. And the fact that we're now accessing everything through a single IDP reduces the number of accounts and systems that people need to use, and reduces the chance of account credential breach. So we're in a position now where we're really confident about bringing on new teams and new people. We've got a great baseline with which we can start scaling the team, with which developers can be brought on very, very quickly. And we're looking forward to making more use of it. I don't think we've scratched the surface in terms of the capabilities that it offers. But if you move on to the last slide, please, Yoav. What it's shown us in particular is what we thought it would do when we started planning the project. Startups can have enterprise-grade risk management, and you're not too small. It really isn't a question of size, it's a question of where you are in your journey. There may be times when your resource is best placed, proving out some strategic developments. But if you think about implementing these controls when you're small, then you're creating a way of growing that helps you accelerate and doesn't bring you new problems as you start scaling. Landing Zone has reduced the friction that we experience today as a tiny team, and being able to describe our policies and have mechanisms that enforce them means that we're no longer just hoping that what we've configured is what we agreed we should do. We've now got the ability to have consistent reporting that shows us where we're drifting from what we decided was appropriate, and in many cases stops us from drifting because they're proactive controls that mean you can't make decisions, or you can't configure resources in ways that you shouldn't. And the last conclusion is that you should consider automating everything pretty much. Typically, where there's going to be cost saving because you're automating a process that you do a lot or that takes a long time, or where you need to have confidence that what is being implemented is consistent. And that cost saving and consistency has been something we've noticed a lot, as I say, very early on with a very small team. Um, the recommendations you can read, I would just end by saying that your infrastructure is incredibly important. Don't just think about features as being things that you need to focus on. Take your time to ensure that what you're building as the core infrastructure of your product is good and will scale. Um, and that's it. I think that's the last slide. Thank you for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, from wherever you are dialing in from. I am Mario. I'm an early stage account manager at AWS. Been at Amazon for about 6 years, three in retail, three at AWS. And for the last sort of year and a half, I've had the pleasure of looking after early stage startups, much like Simon's, where we basically love to sort of build alongside them, accompany them from a technical point of view, a financial point of view. So today I'd love to take you a little bit through some of the work that Simon has done, that we've done with Simon from our point of view, and then sort of some of the other things that we also do for startups. So hopefully those of you on the call find that very useful going forward. So next slide, please, Yoav. So as Simon mentioned, it's a sort of an ongoing relationship. AWS credits are a big part of it, but it's not the only part, hence why I've put it at the start. We do offer credits to startup. It's very, very important, especially for early stage startups, right? We want to make sure that every single dollar is stretched as far as possible. So our flagship program is called Activate, which essentially means 100,000 for startups that have raised series, pre-seed, seed, and Series A. There are lots of other programs and incubators that do tend to offer less, but you can then always top that up. The main message there is if you have less than 100, if you get 10,000, for example, for doing an incubator program, and then you raise a seed, then you would get whatever the difference was. So 10,000, 100,000 minus 10,000 would be 90,000. It's very important we don't just give you the cash and say, have fun. We really like to sit down with a startup, make sure that we can stretch that as far as possible. It doesn't matter just because it's credits. We want to make sure that you are really equipped with the right strategy to, spend those credits in a wise way. I've rarely had the conversation, this is the perfect amount. It's either too much or too little. So we really want to make sure that we find a fit and a program to how you can spend that money. Creation of a landing zone, I won't really touch much upon it. We've heard a lot from Simon, some of the projects that we've done with him. POCs in general. So we've got lots of POCs with Simon. So or other startups, they'll come to us and say, hey, we're thinking about doing XYZ. For example, with Simon, I think we're looking at now like creation of synthetic data, whether that's through LLMs or any other service that we would have. Again, we would pay for some of that work to actually happen. And we would pay for those credits to Simon. So outside of what we've already given him, say, hey, I'm really interested in testing this service. And if it's LLMs, it would likely be Bedrock. And I'd love to use, Opus 4.5, which just dropped this week. We would be more than happy to, finance some of it, test it out. And if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, hey, let's shut it down. Let's reiterate. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's understand what it is that hasn't happened and why that didn't work, right? So we would define sort of a success criteria. Hopefully it ticks the box. If it doesn't matter. We go back, we reiterate, we go forward. Something that happened, we met with AWS leadership. So we had our summit. Simon came along with some of his team. They sat down with some of the managers. They always love to hear sort of stories, what's happening, what's been building. And so therefore we like to keep them involved as to, as Ontime's journey grows and as they keep launching into new markets or launch new features, we like to keep everyone updated and posted. And it makes everyone sort of easier to keep on top of things, whether that's opportunities for PR and marketing. And I'll touch upon that later. Looking forward, we've got lots of things planned, multi-region support, whether that's in some of our AZs, it's an FSI product, so there's lots of local regulation that Simon needs to sort of comply with. So always on hand to support there. And then we've also got the whole cloud DevOps support. Now, as AWS, we're not able to sort of get involved and actually touch the code, but we can give advice. And that's where we would work with a partner like Automat-it, who comes in as a sort of three-way relationship, and they actually take care of all of that part for Simon, the DevOps, as you mentioned, to make sure that your team is constantly focused on shipping product, client-facing stuff, and all the heavy lifting in terms of infrastructure is done by someone else. Next slide, please, Yoav. What does this look like for you on the call if you are a startup? Basically, you would speak to myself. I'm part of the account team. It's not just me. I'm supported by a fantastic team. Notably, I'm with my counterpart, my technical counterpart, Kevin, who's a solutions architect. So we really tackle all the subjects head on. I like to consider myself sort of an ALB, right? Most queries come through me, and then it's my job to mobilize the right people, the right resources, pull the right levers to ensure that we are giving you all the tools to be successful. And some of those things, again, not limited to, but some of these things which I think have been very useful and that some we've done with Simon, some we haven't yet. For example, would be you have a dedicated solutions architect. So this is someone who we sit down on a call, understands your business, your challenges, and what you're trying to build. And we basically want to make sure that everything is right size. We really want to try and stretch the dollars, whatever it is, if it's capital that you've raised, if you're bootstrap, if it's credits. We want to try and make sure that it's really stretched as far as possible and that everything is right size. We're not spending money foolishly, shall we say. Obviously, we would do that through also funding programs like Activate and the POC fund, which I've touched upon. We also have the expert reviews. So Simon mentioned upon that your essay, the more general essay, he has a great understanding of the infrastructure and what you guys are trying to build. But in this case, Simon is very FSI focused. And so, as he mentioned, I looped in some people that it's not just for enterprise grade. These are people which might have enterprise experience and they're able to bring what some of the sort of best in class leaders in terms of infrastructure are doing to someone like to a startup, basically. And that's fantastic, as Simon mentioned. If you're able to set this from the start as you're setting the direction, it just becomes easier to make changes earlier on than later on. Marketplace support, that's both ways. Whether you are planning on buying things through the marketplace, again, when you're part of the Activate program, you get a whole bunch of discounts. There's Slack and there's a whole startups.aws. You can check all of them out. But the other great thing is when you actually want to deploy your solution on the marketplace. So this works very, very well when you have a product that you actually want to run in your customer's environment. Typically, a big enterprise might not want to give you their data. So you basically have to set up your product in their environment. The marketplace is a great way for people to deploy. And actually, if they've got a large PPA with us, sort of they sign a big commit with us and they buy your solution, whatever they pay you actually helps them to reach that commitment. So they've got lots of incentives to actually buy through the marketplace. And it's something that we're seeing has increasingly success for both startups and enterprise customers. And then we've also got co-marketing. So if we end up doing something really cool or niche, or just in general, the relationship we're constantly building and we're growing upon it, we love having, inviting startups to some of our speaking slots, writing a blog post on startups.aws about some of the cool stuff that we're doing. It's really the case that your success becomes our success and it becomes AWS success. So we love to sort of encourage each other and keep building that brand for both of us. Next slide, please. How can you leverage your team? It's a few different things. During a first call or any kind of call, we really need to understand, or we prefer understanding your milestones, whether that's business or technical, and why that helps us work backwards from them. Tell us where you are now and where you'd like to be in 3 to 6 months. It's very difficult to sort of lay out on the table everything we can do unless we know in the direction which you're heading. Are you trying to fundraise? Are you trying to build a product? Are you trying to get out of beta and launch into full production? These things are things that are really, really helpful. Similarly, hey, I've launched now an app for my version, so we're expecting a 3x increase in the number of users. These are things which allow us to prepare both from an infrastructure point of view, as well as a business point of view. And so, for example, from an infrastructure might be, have you thought about right sizing everything? How do you have the right capacity? From a business point of view, it might be, we're doing this event. We would love for you guys to be there and discuss about how you're now planning on 3xing the amount of users that you have. Similarly, bring your CTO or CEO, depending on who you are, come both to the call so we're able to sort of cross all the T's, dot all the I's, from the start, because sometimes the conversation just heads into a very technical point of view and we're not able to share the whole value proposition of the kind of work that we can do. So again, that's really, really important. And then we can always split out into separate tracks later down the line. And then quite related to that is share your architecture diagram, right? Let's maximize the time. So whenever we have a call, we love to have, it might be a very simple architecture, it might be a very complex architecture, but the sooner we have it before a call or any kind of meeting, we're able to really specify and understand where we can give advice. I might be able to loop someone in straight away, whether it's media entertainment, whether you're a gaming company, we can bring the right experts to the table so we're able to maximize the conversation. Similarly, if you are working with like sort of NVIDIA GPUs and you have a very niche specific, we can bring some NVIDIA experts who actually solutions architect to the table as well to discuss. And we sort of sit in a 3-4 way, depending if there's a partner involved, to do some of that work. And finally, plan your future growth. I know that's a big ask for a startup. Sometimes we don't even know where we're going to be tomorrow. But this again helps us with planning and forecasting. And right now, a lot of the conversations and emails that I'm receiving is, hey, I'm trying to access Bedrock, but I'm being throttled because we don't have enough. So my ask would be share with us what you guys are trying to do. There might be better ways of doing it, for example. But if not, share with us what you guys are trying to do, and then we will proactively raise the limits to the right place, right? Sometimes I've had customers saying, well, in 1 year, I know that I'm going to be at 10 million tokens per minute, so I didn't want to turn that on at the moment. It just doesn't mean we're able to do that, because giving it to you would take away capacity from someone else. So it's all about, being sensible and not, saying next week we will be here and then the week after we will already outgrow it, but putting the right steps at the right places and being proactive in that communication just means that we're able to service you, no one is getting throttled, and then we're also able to service capacity to the right places. So yeah, this is a very, very brief overview. If anyone has any questions, I'll be around at the end of the call. But hopefully we continue building together with some of the startups that are on the call, and maybe who knows, next year we will be doing a similar webinar with someone in the call from with a startup for yours, and we'll keep building together. Thanks, Yoav.
Thank you, Mario.
Smashing. Can you guys hear me okay? So
Yeah.
great. Hello everyone. Obviously, many thanks to our lovely speakers, Simon and Mario, who obviously gave us a great presentation. I did catch the joke from Mario about being an ALB, a load balancer. So watch out, that might be a new announcement in reInvent. And of course, we always love it when our customers, like Simon, come in and share the platform with us, to present some of the good things that we've obviously co-built. I have to condense my slides, so I don't think I'll be able to go through everything, but I'll just give you a teaser, right? So obviously whet your appetite and see if we can actually continue this conversation further down the line. So hello everyone, my name is Grex. As you have mentioned on the start, I'm a principal solution architect, Automat-it, been with the company for over 2 years. My background used to obviously be software engineering. Previously worked at AWS and then at Google in a similar role, and now I work with lots of startups and scale-ups in the industry. I'll kick off my slide deck with a personal story. So I remember back in 2017 when I had a landing zone, I'm thinking that sounds like a really cool name. What does it mean? Am I like trying to land something in an environment? And of course, if you relate it back to cloud computing, it's effectively a secure, scalable, well-architected, multi-tenanted environments. If there's anything you take away, just 4 different keywords I mentioned. How do I build a safe and secure area where I can run my workloads secure and effectively? Think about your recent data breaches. Just looking over the internet, the Dutch police had a breach just last year. 63,000 records of their staff were leaked online. And then closer to home, TfL, 5,000 customer data was what actually leaked as well. So you find out that if you start on a rocky foundation, it makes it a lot harder to contain these things when they happen. So as you heard earlier, there is a lot of benefits in actually starting very well. And obviously towards the end of the slide, you actually get a better idea how to kick off very quickly. So there's a common misconception of it being a very complex setup in landing zone. Far from it. As a startup, as a scale up, the steps to actually starting securely is very, very quick and secure. So if I kick off with the why, So one of the things I mentioned before, security, your business could be knocked off straight away just by having a security gap or breach. And so for us, making sure that the right policies are in place to make sure your buckets are secure, your EBS volumes are encrypted, things are done in the right way, so that when you're focusing on your product as a startup, certain things have been taken care of for you. I remember one of the pain points Simon mentioned about manual configuration. There's obviously there is that tendency to do things manually very quickly, but setting up a proper landing zone gives you the tooling to actually make those changes. So you can start off with a couple of accounts, and then as you grow, as you spin up more environments, it's so much easier to set up that infrastructure to help you grow and succeed. So hopefully this gives you a snapshot of things that you miss out of if you don't set up a landing zone. For those of you who work in a regulated industry, where SOC 2, HIPAA, and all the different things are necessary, are relevant, it gives you that very solid foundation to actually set up your environment very well in a very secure and efficient manner. And so, one thing I'm going to touch on is give you some trade secrets. So I sort of tagged this as your four superpowers. If there's anything you have to remember today, think about these four key things that will differentiate you from obviously your competitors there. Cost is a big one. I can't count how many dozens of customers I talk to in a month, cost being one of them. So setting yourself up for success by using one of the tools you get by deploying a landing zone solution ensures that you only pay for what you use. So where you actually have budgets in place, you can actually make sure that your workloads run in a way that there's no actually surprises. You get early visibility of issues before they occur. I remember one particular customer ran a job that copied S3 buckets, and they had a 13K bill just like that, just because there was nothing in place to warn them that this was happening. So cost is one of the things you gain. Now, obviously, for the security element, I cannot state how important this is. Again, people start with prod and non-prod environments. You have that clear delineation of responsibility. Make sure that you don't accidentally experiment in one environment, and before you know, you've affected production. So making sure that things are separate, the right permissions are in place, is actually one of the benefits you get for that. Now, scaling, that's a good thing. You see, you're obviously developing your features, you're releasing out daily, and then you're seeing things grow. So a good landing zone enables you to actually scale in a very, very quick and rapid way. And then I guess the last thing, as I mentioned before, from the compliance side, you find that this is very important in terms of giving your investors, your customers, the confidence that me as a startup, as a scale up, I'm doing things the right way. I'm not cutting corners. I'm not doing things in a hacky way, but I'm doing things the best recommended way. Okay. Um, Now, some of the things you see inside the landing zone is the isolation I talked about, making sure that you deploy things in the right environments. And if you have a multi-tenanted platform, again, where obviously multiple tenants share the same platform, you make sure your isolation is in place. Where you're deploying on a sole basis, again, you have the infrastructure to vend new accounts in a very efficient way. And then it enables you to go very, very quickly. Okay. And then one of the things that you would see is very useful is the use of shared services. So things like your transit gateway, VPC pairing, your DNS, all of those things are set up for you in a way that ensures that you start to reuse those components in an efficient way. Okay. So without overstating the importance of this, I'd like to leave a few things in your mind to say, I'm walking away from this presentation knowing that I'm going to be determined, even if I've started my journey in the cloud in a way that I consider less secure, I can fix this. And this is some things we see often where customers have already deployed something in AWS, maybe on a single account. They come to us and we obviously scope out a plan to get them to a very solid foundation. I know my time is up. Obviously, I'm being respectful of your time. I'll just end with this slide here. So this is what a typical architecture would look like for a land design project. As you can see at the top, you have your management account. So gone are the days where as a root user, you log in with your root account. No, we don't want that. We feel like this isn't good practice. Your workload should be in a separate account from your root account. In fact, you should not even be logging in as your root account. So you have that sort of setup where you have your root accounts, your billing account at the top level, and then you have clear separation. I see organization units as buckets or folders where you have your prod OU and your prod organization unit, you have your prod workloads in there, same with your non-prod. And then you have a separate one for management where things like your shared services are in place, your audit, log, security, as Simon mentioned, one of the benefits you get for actually having a landing zone. So hopefully you walk away from today's session having this picture in mind and with the view of how can I actually engage with a company like us to actually help you run in a more secure and efficient way. Thank you.
Quacks, wow, that was that was really impressive in terms of timing, in terms of your fast talk, yes, yet still understandable. So thank you so much for all of you guys for sharing your wisdom and this super valuable content. We have time for basically two questions, I believe. So let's start quickly with the first one, which is, I think it's for Simon. Do you work only with AWS or do you work also with Google Cloud, for example?
No, we work just with AWS. I do wonder whether the question was, does Landing Zone work only with AWS? So no, we are only on AWS at the moment.
Very well. That was quick. Thank you, Simon. Next question, I believe it's for Quex, although perhaps any of you can answer that. So the question is, could you provide an estimate on the time that is generally required to establish a compliant and secure landing zone?
Cool. I'll take that very quickly. One of the things, obviously, I didn't share is the journey, right? So anywhere from 1 to 2 hours. There are three sort of ways you can approach a landing zone. Obviously, control tower gives you that foundational element where, it takes a couple of hours to get you started in the right structure. But where you need to tailor your solution, to be able to align with your business needs. I mentioned multi-accounts, multi-tenanted solution. It could take anywhere from 2 to 10 days. But the good news, if you remember what Mario said, there's lots of support from AWS that actually help you through a partner like us to build that landing zone solution. So 99% of the cases is actually free. Okay, so just to repeat, 2 hours to up to 10 days it would normally take.
All right. Quex, thank you so much. I'm just gonna mention that we got a question from Colin asking, can you provide us slides afterwards, please? Um, I'm not certain in terms of, speaking of compliance and also privacy, I'm not sure that we can actually share that. But as I mentioned, the recording will be shared with you afterwards. So you'll be actually able to see most of the slides. All right, that's about it. As you can see here in the screen, there is already an ability to scan this QR code for our next webinar, which will happen next week. This time about FinOps. And last